have a music stand, not for the playing some music. Is this okay? But I don't really need a stage today. I want to get closer to you, speaking and playing and showing a little bit. And perhaps, I mean, we were supposed to start with Robert. I'm sorry, we lost track of each other in the morning, so I feel partly guilty for not bringing you here in time, but now we're here. So I will start instead, and perhaps it's good because I will make a little journey, the kind of journey that I have made through my musical life from a very, very classical background, very rooted in the classical music, through the contemporary and Baroque playing, into improvisation, and how that has that kind of journey. What does it come from? And I would like to start to talk about more. I mean, or no, just comment on extended techniques as a concept. Extended from what? That is big question, of course. If you come from the classical tradition, I mean, there is a lot to extend from, I would say, because if you come, what is a beautiful violin sound, for instance? What do you consider is beautiful? What is normal playing? I don't know. I wouldn't say that this. So if you extend from that, you have a long way to go in very many different directions. And that's, I would like to describe it a bit, and perhaps. I would like to actually do it by showing my own way, so to say. How did I develop my musicianal violin playing or musicianship? And so one example to show, for me, was first of all coming into the historical practice. I was always very occupied with contemporary music that I had been all through my classical training and classical professional life, but then also meeting the world of the Baroque instruments was a very, very strong kind of influence to change from the kind of, what is violin playing? How is it? This is normal sound, though. And to start to question that by taking away things that you are supposed to do, like vibrate, and instead to let the sound work by itself without the vibrato, and to choose when you want to vibrate. That was a very big thing. To play intonation is also something completely different within Baroque music, where you actually try to really play in tune, which is almost impossible. But articulation, which is in the so-called normal traditional violin playing, you have an ideal that has been going on for a very long time of sustained and romantic sound of violin, and to instead focus on the instrument talking or articulating, like making or in the Baroque music, that you can do so many small things with the bow that we actually almost unlearned through the centuries by playing very romantically and very, very sustained and big sound for big halls. I can't make all these examples here because it's perhaps for classical musicians it's very obvious. It's very, I mean, we know that, and we have to challenge it also in the normal playing, so to say. One of the but working through this let's say journey that I did, I think the Baroque playing and the contemporary playing is very often connected in many ways, because it does challenge a kind of normal playing within this tradition. I can give an example of Xenakis, for instance. I think also within the contemporary music, you have there was the development of the electronic music and electroacoustic sounds that was done by many composers, like, for instance, Xenakis, who did work only on electroacoustic music, and then started to write, stopped that actually, and wrote only for instruments. And then of course you have with you something else. You have the sounds of another sound world that you try to bring back to the, so to say, to the instrumental world. And he had very strong ideas about beauty. I'll play you a little bit of his Mika. It was important for my idea of what the violin sound could be like. It's a piece entirely composed or done with one expression or one technique, and that's glissando. So you're in constant movement, just staying on some notes sometimes. And he's very, very, very strict about the kind of aesthetics that he implies for you to do this. And he even writes very, very strictly that you are not supposed to, it's not a glissando of a gypsy kind, even he writes. It's glissando as a just very, very even, as you never stop or try, if it gets very, like you have very long, you don't change the speed or of the music. It's very, very strictly notated, but so that and it's not supposed to be the sound. I mean, the vibrato, of course, completely strictly forbidden. And so on. And there, he's written out these things that, you know, this, I want this sound. I want to change the violin sound. It does have to make it into something else. And that's very challenging and wonderful. I want to show a little bit how my journey started actually with a little bit like programming, because I played a lot of solo concerts with solo violin, and either you come to a contemporary festival and you play contemporary music, or you come to Baroque and then you have to supposed to play only Baroque music. So I was very fed up with this ghetto kind of feeling and wanted to mix the styles and even the violins. Now I play only on this, but I have also an old violin that I more and more improvise on, actually. So then I started to make programs, let's say with Bach, having a Bach partita as a kind of big form for a program, and then putting in contemporary pieces in between and kind of breaking the form of Bach, but still keeping that as the whole form of the concert, which was nice. I mean, that was because it was nice. It was much also thinking about the audience, because if you play Bach, people get kind of, they feel familiar and safe, and then you give them something else, and you can see in the connection between these pieces that music is music, and that you can actually enjoy something else, and then you can still get back to what you're more used to, and so on. So that was the pedagogical thought, almost, as well as the artistic. But then I started to develop that also, and I just want to give an example of, it was like, there is a Bach movement from a sonata that I really love, which is the A minor. And so on. It's very beautiful. It's very dramatic grave of the A minor. It ends in a like say a classical concerto. You can't play this movement by itself because it ends on the dominant. They will say you have to go on to get to Tonica, what do you say in English? Tonica. It's tonica in English. I don't remember. Well, whatever. So you have to get this. It ends on an E, and you should get to an A. So I thought, but I really want to play this because after this grave, there's the world's most boring fugue for like 10 minutes going on. And so on. And it goes on, it's really just one theme going, and I find fugues very boring, so, but I wanted to play this movement. So what can I do? Yeah. I realized then, of course, I have a piece by Kayasariao that does start on an A. So let's just go seamlessly. And that started another way. I will just make the end of this piece, and you will hear how it sounds. I need the music to be. Just not get lost. And so on. This moment, I find it was first times you do that, when people think you're going to play Bach, and then you suddenly, in the end of the piece, just, for a moment you don't really know where you are. You make a kind of time travel in an instant of 200 and whatever, 50 years or something. And this I started to play with a lot in the programs, just going seamlessly and making breaks or making transitions between. And so this was a nice way of making programs and making concerts. But it started me then, in that time I also started to improvise. And more and more felt that, all this is also, of course, built on a great love for the tradition somewhere. I want to break with the tradition. I'm very, very fed up with the kind of classical tradition of how concert has to be made, how you have to play, what the way you have to follow the scores and the hierarchies, all the things that you have in the classical tradition that I was really, really trying to challenge in many ways. But still, there is a love for much of the music and the idea of composed music also. But coming into improvisation was a way of really being able to challenge myself also in this, of course. And so I started also, of course, then in improvisation, changing between written music and improvisation, like using a lot of Bach, because Bach is very. It is for solo violin. You can use it all your life. You will never get fed up with it, and so it's a good way to. And also that I was thinking, I had a kind of almost this beautiful idea of, Bach. It's when you listen to his music, it's so unbelievably self-sure and confident in a tradition, and an idiom that is just not questioned. I mean, you don't have to. He's always sure. So okay, but let's say just that. Not himself, but his music would meet some of the music or the styles or the techniques or the aesthetics of today in music. Wouldn't he get a little bit unsure? Wouldn't his music kind of get, what do you call it? Vittra lite. What does that mean?
Wither.
Wither, yeah, so that you would wither and kind of get a bit destroyed in the corners, and this music travels through hundreds of years, and it gets to us today, and it cannot be so safe and sound. it has to be, something has happened. So I started to kind of do that with Bach. You know, like improvising within it and also picking it apart, deconstruct the pieces, using the tradition as material instead of as iconic canon. And that has been the most, the few last years, through the instruments or tools of improvisation and deconstruction, hacking could be a good description sometimes, and that has made great fun, I must say, because it also still I can go on playing many of the pieces that I love from tradition, but to do that in a completely other way. I just want to, before I will make some examples of that, but that has been, so to say, my travel through this kind of work. Then I want to try to show you some techniques that I like to work with. There is, of course, preparation of the instrument, which is not so much loved by classical musicians, I can say. I can just show you some little things. Very, very sweet, these little things, for instance. But they're making a huge difference of this instrument. I love that sound. I really do, because it does make it changes. Like you like put something to change your voice that you don't really you don't master it completely, and that is something giving special qualities that you discover every time you play. You find new ways of using it. But preparation is one thing, of course. I also the mutes. You can put things. Of course you have all the techniques of not playing on the strings. I mean, I often make, I play together with my sister who also plays the violin. We often make duos together, which is ridiculous. Why two violins? I mean, you have already with one you can do. But it's like a game almost. We are trying to kind of challenge the instrument together in a way that sometimes we just say, yeah, let's do that with discovering the instrument. And then we know that we can just do anything but play on the strings. And it's, I mean, there are so many fine parts of this instrument that sound completely wood is so beautiful. The strings are very beautiful. I love this kind of the friction that is on the instrument. That you can, where you hear that there is really the string against the bow against the string. That's the hair of the horse and the gut of the pig, which is kind of something that is the whole kind of essence of playing a string instrument. But also, there's, I'm not, this is, so, I mean, extended into whatever is I think, to tell me about the time a little bit, because I'm fine. Okay, how much more? 5? Well, I mean, improvisation has changed completely my way of actually working with music, because it's late in my life. I mean, I've been going on playing classical music for, I don't want to count, but improvisation I started, and I don't want to either to go into deep how that happened, but it's like 10 years ago, I would say. 10 years of freedom, of a kind of way of actually being able to think that you go up on the stage and you don't know what is going to happen. That is, from a classical tradition, absolutely impossible. I mean, that you actually go and have such an openness for the situation, especially, of course, with other people, which is where you are always being challenged and in the dialogue. Actually, improvising solo, I find it's wonderful, and then of course you prepare yourself in many ways. But I am now part of a group in Stockholm, the Revoid Ensemble, that is we are having a research project on collective improvisation, where we actually really work on this, and we are up to 8 or 10 with been working really. And it sounds so okay. What do we research? Well, we research actually what are the different strategies, ideas, the working ways. What are we actually doing? And we are actually working musically most of the time. We are playing together, and we are trying to discover what does this give. We have found out that we actually find certain, let's say, aesthetic or musical modules that appear, and like suddenly we play like very, like, let's say, sound mass, we would call it, when we make something very, 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 very sound-like, but everybody's very active, perhaps according to some more transparent things. So we name these modules, and we try to create as many modules as possible that we feel that we can move through very freely, and not always, of course, moving together. We are combining them. And the thing is that these never stop. I mean, we have started with 10 modules, and now we don't think of them anymore. It's just a way of how do you move through a musical landscape, and what kind of musical landscape do we create together, we've been doing this now for 2 years, and it's like every time we just dig deeper and deeper into this kind of playing together and what it is. And of course we try to theorize that, because we are researchers, but the most important is that we actually do things that we never would have time to do if we wouldn't call it research, because we're actually playing like this for years together. So I'm also doing another research project that I have been called Unlearning Performance from the beginning, and then changing the name because I'm getting more and more tired of this concept of unlearning, because it means that you have to learn something to unlearn, and you have to relearn, and you have to, so getting away from the concept of learning actually, and more of actually forgetting what you have, the skills or that you have learned. How can you forget? It's almost impossible, but I mean it's a way to step away from your skills and your tradition, your conventions, your backpack of ideas of how things, to try to do that I do it by having people challenge me, and to challenge others, of course, in what we think is our and there I've had as a core piece has been the Chaconne of Bach, which is it's the very iconic solo piece for violin. So it's wonderful to just feel that you attack that every time you go into this work. You attack this icon of. So I would just do something to end around that, because there we are in the middle. We're working on different ways to challenge my way, knowing this piece and trying to forget it. I don't feel so comfortable doing that here, but that's a little bit the idea, to have this music in the back, picking it out, also in combination with moving, with the room, with but yeah, picking it apart, but still having it there. That's the unlearning kind of idea. We now made that I'm going to change to the concept of forgetting. Well, I think that is.
A little bit uncomfortable trying that. It's like, but is that something that you often perform in front of audiences then, or is it
I did,
for you?
But then after that I had been working in the studio with a theater director who just challenges me, and we challenge each other in a way on idea of using material as a experimental material. And then he has told me things that that because if I do it in concert, I do it. Of course, I love to do it, and it's like improvisation. But you always use what you know, and to feel that you can actually get challenged by someone, that it gives you the impulses to do completely different things. That doesn't know the piece as well as you do, and. Therefore gives you, so there has been many, you have to make, and we have mixed that with reading poetics of different people, like Italo Calvino and some other writers who write about their writing and about aesthetics, and to use that also, so it has been many different perspectives.
We can speak in the other one.
This one. Talk through this one. All right. Well, it's on. So in 25 minutes, I'm going to just choose, one more narrow topic, because I can't describe the totality of my work in 25 minutes. And I think what I will talk about is the influence of electronic music on my approach to playing acoustic music. And I am one of the... Whoa. Yeah, I think we have to go up from there. Yeah. My goodness, I was about to release my inner Rod Stewart. Years and years ago, I worked as a recording engineer, and I did a lot of the technical work that students do for studios, like soldering microphone cables. We had big discussions about how you would solder the microphone cable for the guy who was singing in The Who, who was always twirling the microphone around like that. Anyway, I was about to say, I'm amongst the very last who first encountered electronic music prior to the synthesizer. And that was a very, very different world because with the synthesizer, there are certain assumptions that you can make about the sound. There are certain things that are sort of prepackaged in these modules, and you can, combine them and mix them and certainly do a lot with them. In what was referred to as the classical electronic studio, you had at your disposal nothing. The light switch was the only thing you could assume was going to do what you thought it would do, if it did it. So, and instead, you had to make a decision about every aspect of any sonority you chose to make. And in that sense, because the tools were much simpler, there was enormous freedom. If you think about the tools that Michelangelo used, they were very simple tools, which allowed him the enormous freedom to do anything he wished. There were no presets that it would take hours to undo. And it changed my hearing profoundly. And it freed me from assumptions in an important way. And again, I've said this in other classes, but it's really important at your stage now to be examining assumptions. Things you've been living with as normal since you were kids need to be looked at by you. Now, you may accept them, that's cool, but you'll know why you accepted them, because you yourself thought about it. Now, every unexamined assumption is building, the wall around your mind and your spirit just a little higher. And as this silo goes up and up and up and up and up and up and up, the sky gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. Now, I of course have dealt and worked with many musicians over my career, but a lot of them have been flute players of one kind or another, and most of them look at the world kind of like that. The tradition has extended and focused and blocked their mind off to other possibilities. Predefinitions abound. It's a, I don't know what the word is, a low nutrition world, and it's tiny. Because what you might be looking for could be right there, and you can't see it. So, so it's very important to have the widest range of information sources, to accept and embrace that lessons can be learned from anyone. If your eyes are open, they are all around you. And, if you're thinking about, I don't know, writing for a violin, you might actually really learn something from watching somebody sweep a floor. It's true. And you guys have just performed one of the classic student moves. Students as statues. Like, how am I going to deal with this strange thing this guy just said? Please keep in mind that it's not Jurassic Park up here. I can see you if you don't move. So, now, so anyway, now, in a traditional approach to an instrument, we would think of this as one note. And it's not one note, it's a bundle of things. And some higher harmonics that are very hard to actually make speak individually, but are in the sound. There's a noise component in there as well. There could be some little turbulences which are kind of analogous to the sound of the bow on a string. Anyway, our ears put it all together, and we would identify that as a bass flute playing an A flat. And the thing is that this blend of things has been very carefully worked on with, a pre-made recipe. So if we decide that we'll take the ingredients and not use the recipe, we can change things around a lot. So for example, instead of, the recipe is, the fundamental is the strongest harmonic. The second partial is the next strongest. The third partial is the next. And it's, one talks in classical instruction about creating this pyramidal sound. Well, you want the aliens to listen, don't you? So you make the damn pyramid, of course. Now, but it's referred to that way, and it works. It's a very useful analogy. So now, let's readjust things and take the second partial and strengthen it. And so now we can, in effect, play the flute in octaves. Can change and strengthen the third partial. In the classical world, this would be a note with a problem. And there are musical therapists ready to work on that. Ready to slam its budding individuality right back into the mold. So supposing the problem, of course, was the fuzz in the sound. There was air in the sound. It wasn't the pure sound. So, well, supposing we went completely the opposite direction. Let's get rid of the pure sound and just have the air. Can be very, very useful. You know. Now, a very basic assumption that we all tend to accept without thinking about it very much is that time runs in the way that we perceive as forward. But musically, it is possible for time to run backwards. And of course, this was a thing that we did a lot in the early days of electronic music. You turn the tape over and play it backwards. It was one of the ways you could make the most massive transformation of sound. Just Shazam, like that, was something John Lennon discovered by accident, taking a working copy of the tune Rain home and putting it on his tape recorder backwards. And Rain has this little coda where some of the tracks are backwards and some are forwards. It's very interesting how they did that. And of course, Jimi Hendrix was the master of backwards guitar. And there are these Hendrix freaks who've written out every note he played. And I have a book that has a transcription of what Jimmy was listening to forwards as he played forward the famous backward, what would become the backward solo in Are You Experienced? And it's very interesting what he used for landmarks and, you know, just thinking the other way in time. So now, if you don't worry about what is supposed to be right and wrong, and you make those decisions for yourself, I mean, there are some things I consider wrong. Dropping the flute on the floor. So, I mean, it's a nice Dadaism, I suppose. I have actually heard that sound, and it's not a high quality sound. So, you know, you can get much better results by thinking carefully about what you want to drop on the floor, and it's something that, you know, you can also pick up and drop again. But precluding things that do damage. In my aesthetic, I'm not interested in doing damage. I don't want to hurt the person playing. I'm not interested in hurting anybody's instrument. For example, I've written a piece for string orchestra, and I wanted a lot of collegno battuto. Well, I know that, you know, good string players tend to have good bows, and they're not so happy about banging on these good bows. But most of them also have some old junky bow, so right on the part, it says, you know, like violin 1, with second bow for collegno battuto. You know, like bring your old junky bow. And at the first rehearsal, one of the percussionists said, you know, we've got a box of timbale sticks. You want to try those? So we passed out the timbale sticks to the string section, and it was the best collegno battuto I ever heard, because they were having the greatest time whamming these little sticks on the string. It couldn't do any harm, and it made an incredible sound. And lastly, I'm not interested in damaging the audience, which is very easy to do with high-powered sound systems. And, you know, if Mr. Hendrix was still alive today, would we be able to communicate verbally? You know, would we be using sign language? Or just passing notes? So, you know, a lot of people who've spent their careers in rock and roll can hardly hear a thing. And I am no longer in agreement with contemporary composers who feel that what they want is the most important thing. You know, people who've written pieces with long, long passages of super high notes on the flute or the piccolo. A fourth octave E on the flute is 104 decibels at the opening to your left ear. And it's louder on the right ear. And this is seriously damaging stuff. All that sound energy aimed at a very, very small group of cells. And so, you know, the question would be, if you needed those frequencies in the piece, how would you get them? In a harmless way. You know, there are oscillators that'll do that. The waveform is so simple that you barely need, you know, a sine wave with just a touch of a few harmonics, and it would sound better in many ways. And it could be produced pretty much in any volume. So, you know, one thing I've encountered many times in working with student composers is people saying, what I want is. And I always smile and I say, why would what you want be of any importance at all? They get all shocked, go, but it's my piece. That's why. I said, well, that's a, you're halfway there. Because what you want still is not important, even if it is your piece. It's what the music wants. You know, can you actually find that? And that tends to produce music that communicates between humans much better. So now, back to our electronic music and the flute. Okay, so in classical playing, making noise with your keys is supposed to be a no-no. But could we turn this up a bit? But I think it's a yes, yes. Now, so we've got the keys. If you close the embouchure hole, the sound descends. On the concert flute, it's a major seventh. On the bass flute, you can't predict because it's going to be close to an octave, but the different makes of bass flutes are not regularized. So you just know the sound will be more or less an octave lower. But it's going to be closer to a major seventh. So then, and it's your opportunity to make faces at the audience. Now, and so while we're making faces, the tongue can act as the drumstick in several different ways. So that's called tongue pizzicato. Just, and the flute will give it pitch. There's also something called the tongue stop. the academic description of that, which I wrote myself, is the alacritous insertion of the tongue into the embouchure hole. Yeah. Which means you just stick your tongue in there really hard. So, then, understanding where all the potential resonators are, one can change the timbre and of course, then in the improvisational or compositional process, you can mix all these things together. Now, taking a look at music from other perspectives is awfully important. And I went out and got a snare drummer's book once just to see music from a very different way. You know, no clefs, no pitches, no flats, no sharps, no naturals, nothing but one line, rhythm, lots of stems, very stem-rich book, and L's and R's. The assumption in the book was that you had, you know, a left hand, a right hand, a stick in each hand, and something to hit. Well, it's safe to assume, I hope, that at least with the flute, you do have a left hand and a right hand, but everything else has got to be created. You have to decide what is the stick and what is the drum. So a handy little drum for the left hand is simply A natural. Could I get a little more power here? We're not going to destroy anybody's hearing with this key click, honestly. The doomsday clock is ticking. It was just set 30 seconds closer yesterday. So, now, and a drum we can make in the right hand, we'll close this key to make a little space, and yeah, let's use that. So now we have, okay, and then if we were to, say, practice a paradiddle, which would be left, right, left, left, right, left, right, right. And then the reverse paradiddle. Now, with your two sticks and your practice pad, you're done. But here, the drums can keep changing. You know, when you start thinking about all of these keys and possible permutations and all the places you could put resonators and strikers, even a simple idea like a paradiddle opens up into a whole, you know, a whole area. So now, there's also, of course, the spatialization of sound, and whether you're, even with a very small flute like the piccolo, you can do this, but it works really well on bigger ones. This is a medium-sized flute. Well, as you can see, nutrition has improved over the years, and, as well as the growth hormones in the milk. So if we all went back to organic food from the very beginning, that would shrink back down to an alto flute. So, but anyway, we have these, just for fun, why don't we pan the mics now? Pan this hard all the way over there. And this one all the way over there. Okay. Yeah. And of course, properly setting that up can give really fantastic results. I often use 4 microphones in concert, one here, one on the left hand, one on the right hand, one at the end. Pan the mouthpiece to the center so there isn't a hole in the sound. The left hand goes all the way there, the right hand sort of goes there, and the end goes, whoops, sorry, there. I'm working now on a system of miniaturizing all the mics and putting them right on the flute, so to get the wall of microphone stands off of the stage. So I think we're about out of time, more or less. Are there any questions? No questions. Oh well.
Probably get back to
I've got all the answers this morning and no one's asking any questions. So now, well, while we're at, we can keep explicating ideas. If you think about what are the presuppositions that whatever tradition you're involved in has, very important to identify them and say them in words. Speak it out loud so you can really hear it and decide if that's a presupposition you wish to embrace or change. Now, musicians were the subjects in a sociological experiment on the unspoken transmission of attitudes. The sociologists correctly surmised that if you were wanting to study attitude in people, well, you should find a bunch of people with a lot of attitude. And any group of musicians has got a great deal of attitude of whatever kind. So, we were a fertile field for this investigation. And it was decisively proven that very powerful attitudes can be conveyed without actually ever being verbally expressed. And, in the classical musical sub-society, there are attitudes that are of great value, I think. If you're not going to give your best, what exactly are we doing here? Isn't trying to go beyond yourself all your life worth it? I mean, those things are, I think, very positive and very useful. But then there are the toxic ones. Every student has heard this without it ever being said to her. What I don't know probably isn't good for me, and I'm better off without it. Now, you say that out loud and you go like, what a bunch of nonsense. What I don't know, and I should be on the case instantly. If there could be a problem, don't touch it. Well, of course there are going to be problems, and we're going to solve them. And this idea of self-limitation is very pervasive. And if you think about it in other areas of your life, not just your musical areas, and think, yeah, well, why am I doing that? Whose voice is that in my head? Is it mine? And so on the flute, of course, you know, I started when I was 8 years old, and I heard the flute on the radio, so I heard it just from the sound. It was actually a piccolo, but I didn't know the difference. It was a little solo in the middle of Rockin' Robin. That's where I made contact with the sound. Tweet, tweet. And it's actually tweedly deedly deet. So then, and so I did not know the presupposition, at least in America, that the flute was a girl's instrument. Sounded great to me. So, and my parents came through. They actually got me a flute and a flute teacher. So, my mother was a piano teacher, and I heard her start, and innumerable beginners. And they started with one note, and then soon there was something in the boom bass, and soon there were chords. My older brother played the cello, and he was sawing away at one note for a while, and then he was sawing away at two notes. I thought all the instruments did that. So my favorite moment of each lesson was when you learned some new notes. And, you know, over the course of a couple of months, you know, we were climbing higher and higher. And one day, we came to the new note moment, and my teacher just went right on. And I said, well, don't we have a new note? And he said, well, you know all the notes now. I said, oh, well, don't we do two notes? And he broke the news. The flute was only going to play one note at a time. What a ripoff. I mean, everybody else gets one note at a time if they want it, and more if they want it, you know? I mean, what did we do to be condemned to only play one note at a time? I have a piece called Orpheus Logs On at hell.edu. But anyway, I couldn't really tell you where this came from, because this was very shortly after my 9th birthday. But I remember thinking right then and there, that's going to change. And I didn't get to change it immediately, but I did, 10 years later, change it profoundly. And you can take whatever it is in your hands and change it too.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, and we'll get to return to all this in the final discussion.